And now joining us on the air and also on SuperTalk TV at supertalk.fm/watch. Also on your Roku device, your Amazon Fire TV device, and on C Spire Television, Channel 70, right next to the Weather Channel. We have the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives, Trey Lamar, joins us. Chairman, how you doing today?
Doing fine. How are y'all?
Not too bad, not too bad. Ways and Means, you might want to check with somebody and get another light bulb. Looks dark in there.
Well, I'm in my law office today trying to get some work done. Maybe a new light bulb would help my productivity somewhat. Sometimes that I struggle with that, but we got too much going on. A lot of balls in the air this time of year.
Exactly. I mean, it just means we have a lot in common. I prefer a darker room myself, so it's perfectly understandable. Now, speaking of a lot of balls in the air, let's start with just a quick recap as we're coming to the end. Just a perfectly normal year for House Ways and Means, wasn't it?
Sure. Just I think everybody would agree that I don't know anybody that has had a normal year. So what an amazing year. I hope it's a year that we don't repeat again next year. I don't know that all of us could handle another year like 2020, but hopefully things will, sooner rather than later, start getting back to normal.
Now, let's look back at the year before we talk any further about things coming up. What to you, as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, what were some of the highlights of this legislative session, some things that stand out in your mind as, we did good work there?
Well, there's several. I mean, first of all, we had what an unprecedented session. We normally wrap our sessions up around the 1st of April. I'd say 1st of April, at least 3 out of 4 years. This session went into the first week of October. So there was just a lot going on. Different deadlines were extended and really unprecedented in so many ways. But we, throughout all that, were able to accomplish a lot of good things. One of which is we appropriated $1.2 roughly billion in emergency CARES Act funding for the state of Mississippi, everywhere from small businesses to refilling the unemployment trust fund to hospitals and schools, and did a lot of good with those funds. We hope that they were spent in an efficient and wise manner. And so far, we're mostly pleased with how that was done.
Now, we've heard a lot on the federal level that in the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, they had money left over still sitting there. Here in Mississippi, though, with the money that was allocated to us from the CARES Act, has all of that been appropriated?
It has all been appropriated, and certainly, unless Congress changes this in the next week or two, we've got all those funds have to be expended by the end of this year. And so we put a safeguard in place here in the state of Mississippi that if any of the designations that were not the funds designated were not spent by a certain date close to the end of the year, then those funds will stay in the state. They will be swept into the unemployment trust fund, which will help keep taxes low for our businesses across the state.
Have you seen any reports or figures? Is there any chance of that happening where we get another influx of money into the unemployment trust fund, or is it all pretty much going to be spent?
Well, no, I think you will have some. I think there were some funds that were left in the Back to Business program. There were some other funds in different accounts that, for whatever reasons, could not be spent by the end of the year. So I do think there will be some additional funds that will be swept into the unemployment trust fund.
Now, that trust fund was in a pretty good place before the entire pandemic situation hit us, and it got drained pretty well. You replenished it some. With any additional funds that go in, are we going to be back to the level we were pre-pandemic in the trust fund, or higher or lower? Or in your guess, what do you think it's going to wind up being?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. Anytime Mississippi's ranked number one in a good category, we need to talk about it. It doesn't happen too often. But before the pandemic, Mississippi was ranked as the number one well-funded employment trust fund in the country. And so we were in exceptional shape. That's a credit to our employers across the state that pay into that fund. Unemployment was low, and the fund was very well funded. And so we were in very good shape to going into this pandemic, thankfully, with our trust fund. So the fund will not be, we've spent an unprecedented amount of money taking care of people that were off work and couldn't work during this pandemic, but the fund will not be up to the exact same dollar amount, but it will be sufficiently funded such that taxes will remain low on businesses across the state.
Now, that was going to be my next question is, could we see a tax increase out of this for the business owners regarding the unemployment fund? But you say probably not?
I surely hope not. I surely hope not. We have one of the lowest, because the fund was so well funded, we had one of the lowest business taxes in the country as far as unemployment tax goes, and we certainly want it to stay that way.
Now, moving forward, we have already heard some proposed budget figures for the upcoming fiscal year, and some of those represented some cuts. Do you see cuts happening in the next budget?
It's certainly possible. We hope to, this is all unprecedented in my lifetime, and I think not just my generation, but the generation before me as well, have never been through a pandemic like this. I never imagined a day where I would see the government force private businesses to shut down, for no fault of their own. So this is certainly unprecedented, but we have weathered it. I think from an economic standpoint here in the state of Mississippi, as well, or better than most every state in the country. And our finances are still strong, and we're hoping that at the very least we'll be able to come in with a level budget this next year.
Well, and we're getting month after month of reports that sales tax revenue is up year on year from last year pre-pandemic, which has got to be a good thing. And you should be getting the new data in the next day or two, shouldn't you? I think for the next month.
We hope so. With the last month's data was very promising. We were above budget by a significant amount, and so collections have remained strong and really have outperformed the economists' expectations from the budget we set last year. So if things continue along those lines, the state budget will be in solid shape going forward. Now, we won't know that until we get later on into this next session, sometime probably in March. But we're cautiously optimistic.
And that does bring up a question to me, though, that the sales tax revenues are up, but the discussion is on the table regarding budget cuts. Where is the shortfall at? It's obviously not in sales tax revenue. So where's the shortfall at that is bringing budget cuts into the conversation?
Well, see, we have the economists come in, Dave, and they over these few months of the last few months of this fiscal or this calendar year, we talk about it, but the budget will not be finalized until sometime in March. So I believe what you're seeing right now is just a very conservative approach at projecting next year's budget. We don't want to jump out there and say, hey, we've got this extra money to spend, or there's not going to be any cuts. We prefer to plan like there may have to be cuts, and then we hope for the best come March. But if these numbers remain strong, I don't believe we'll be talking about cuts. But we hope, we'll find out more about that in March when the numbers come in at that time.
Well, and I would suspect, going from that same mindset, as we were getting this session started this year and then the pandemic hit, at the start of the session, there was a lot of talk about pay raises for state employees and other people, and it quickly became apparent this was not the year to have that conversation. You think that might come up next year?
It certainly could. And I know leadership in the Senate and leadership in the House want to look at any way we can to provide additional pay raises across the state for state employees and our teachers. So I believe you'll see that conversation continue on into this next session, and hopefully, come March, the budget will be in in the shape where we can actually seriously consider that.
I'll tell you what, we're up against a break. Can you hang on through the break?
Sure, glad to.
Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Representative Trey Lamar, with us. New coronavirus numbers today. COVID-19 pandemic, 2,283 new cases, 42 new deaths. That's after a new record yesterday of 2,746. That's over 5,000 in 2 days. We're talking with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Representative Trey Lamar, and there has been some talk about the possibility of delaying the session, which you can't delay the start. That's in the Mississippi Constitution. Yeah. But what do you think the odds are about you guys taking care of what absolutely has to be taken care of in a couple of days, and then gabbling out for a month or two to try to wait out the post-Christmas surge in COVID-19?
Well, Dave, there certainly has been some talk about that. We're sitting here on December 10th, I believe today is, and there's, we don't know what's going to take place over the next month. We need to prepare for the worst, but we just simply don't know. So there's no reason to rush to a judgment as far as what we may need to do on January 5th or the first or second week of January at this time. We've got time to consider that. Certainly we want to be smart, just like all Mississippians need to be smart in this pandemic. Just use good common sense. Don't ignore the realities that we're dealing with. But at the same time, we have no plans whatsoever to shut down our economy again. We can't. We're just not going to do that, barring some additional great catastrophe. And I certainly don't believe that our governor has any intention of shutting down our economy again the way he did back in the spring. And so what that means is that come January, we as leaders of this state want citizens to be back to work, to be back to productivity. We want businesses in as safe a fashion as possible to be being productive. We need workers working and earning a paycheck. We want schools back in business. We want teachers teaching and kids learning. And if we, as I believe we should, are expecting all these people to go, get up every morning, go to work and be productive, take care of their families, teachers to teach and kids to learn, then I think the legislature needs to be down in Jackson doing its job as well. That's not something that that's just not good leadership. I don't believe if we go sit at home and expect everybody else to go do their jobs. And so, barring some catastrophe, I believe you will see the legislature back at work in January and continue our session as normal. Now, if something happens between now and then, or we get into the session, on into January or February, and there's a good reason for us not to be together, then I certainly, will support us being wise and smart and doing what we need to do. But if at all possible, we need to be back at work in January doing our jobs.
And speaking of that, however the new session unfolds, hopefully by next October, we won't, still be talking about what's going on that day in the legislature like we have this year. But however it unfolds, there's some big things that are going to be coming up in this session that you guys are going to be dealing with. Hit some of the high points that you see on the roadmap moving forward, things that are going to come up that you guys are going to have to deal with.
Sure. Well, I'll be glad to do that. Let me step back because there's something I didn't mention earlier about the 2020 session. Obviously, we had to deal with all of the emergency pandemic, but we also, in the Ways and Means Committee on the House side and the Finance Committee on the Senate side, deals with this. But we passed a very, very conservative borrowing bill. We call that the bond bill in the legislature. And so we borrowed approximately, as much as we paid off. We try to keep that number in check as much as possible, and only spend that money on projects that make sense. And we have a what I believe is a renewed commitment on infrastructure projects. And so we were able to fund through bonding, conservative bonding, and also cash that we have from BP settlements and other one-time monies that we have, able to fund infrastructure projects all across the state. Something that I'm very proud of. People people want to see their roads improved and the roads maintained. They want to see and expect from government their water and their sewer and their basic services uh, maintained, but they want to see those at a level that where they're provided the services that they expect when they pay taxes to their state. And so we were able to do that this past session, and I certainly anticipate us continuing to look at other ways that we can fund the needed infrastructure projects that we have all across the state. And what I mean by that are roads, bridges, water and sewer. We have to help our cities and counties, and we've done a good job over the last few years of getting additional funds in a very conservative way back to our cities and counties that they can in turn use for road projects and other infrastructure needs. So I think you'll see a continued focus on that out of the Ways and Means Committee and just the legislature as a whole. I know the leadership very much supports doing that. So that's one thing I look forward to this next session. Another thing that may be important to some, may not be important to others, but it affects a lot of businesses because most everybody that I know likes to eat. If you like to eat, then you like to go out to eat occasionally, and which means you frequent our restaurant businesses. And so one of the big issues that many of our retail restaurants have had over specifically the last year, but really it's kind of been building up over the last couple of years, are the difficulties dealing with the ABC, or the Alcohol Beverage Control warehouse that we have in Jackson. For those who don't know, for reasons that were that may have made sense at the time, years and years ago, back in the 60s, I believe it was, when it was first set up, but the government has a government-owned, government-controlled monopoly over the warehousing and distribution of alcohol and wine in the state. We have one warehouse located in Gluckstadt. The warehouse is outdated. The legislature has not done a good job over the last 20 years or so of providing the state with the resources that are needed to modernize that warehouse and update it in a way that we can take care of the businesses that rely on those products. And so one thing you're going to see the legislature do, and this would originate in the House Ways and Means Committee and in the Senate Finance Committee, is reforming that system. And that's really a big deal because it affects a lot more businesses than someone might initially realize.
Well, and in regards to the ABC problem, it kind of got some focus this year when we hit the bottleneck, and we realized that that's a pretty stripped down, outdated system that they're using over there through no fault of their own. That's just the way it's been from a budgetary standpoint, and that has to be fixed. That has to be addressed in some way, I would think. So I'm glad to hear you say that part of it.
It certainly does, but that's what you get, Dave, when you have the government in control of what, in most cases across the country, the private sector handles. By its very nature, it's been neglected over the years by the legislature because of it's political. I mean, that's the way it's set up. The legislature is the political branch of government, and that's part of it. So by having the government in that business is going to be subject to politics and the political, needs of the day. And so, an example of that is when the state has an extra $10 million in any given year to spend on improvements. Well, it's going to be a lot easier, and politics are going to be dictate that it's better to go spend that $10 million on education or fixing our roads and bridges and things of that nature than it is to go spend it at the liquor warehouse. And so when you have the government in that business is going to be affected by the political expediency of the day. And so that's what we've got to take a real look at is here in 2020, does it make sense for the state government to continue to be in this business? And we've got to look at does it make sense to look at some of our neighboring states like Tennessee or Louisiana, and to some extent Alabama on their wine side. Does it make sense to let the private sector come in and handle some of those businesses? Because I believe the private sector is certainly capable of doing it. The only reason that you hear from proponents that want to stay in the business is because of the taxes that are derived from the current setup. And I believe if that's the only problem or the only reason we're in the business, then certainly we can get a bunch of smart people in the room and figure out how to solve that.
Representative Trey Lamar, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and I think going on record now saying he is not in any way interested in being a bootlegger. Representative, we appreciate your time. I know you've got stuff you've got to get to. You're busy trying to actually take care of some business in your business today. So go get that taken care of so you can knock off early today. How about that?
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all having me, and I wish y'all and all your listeners a very Merry Christmas.